Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Oasis Focus and Finance Show. I'm your host Shafiq Morton. As always, it's great to be with you. In the last quarter, everything has looked a bit cloudy, especially if we look at the international scenario with tensions between US and China, and of course the scenario between Iran and the US as well. The central banks have looked a bit dovish. We see the US Fed, for example, talking about cutting interest rates later in the year, and of course Australia and China already seem to be going that way. China, it seems, is focusing more on infrastructural growth back home. On the South African scenario, we have seen the inflation rate staying fairly stable, but on the other hand, a whole host of things happening all at the same time, clouding the central vision. But to help us understand exactly what has been happening in the last quarter and the way going forward is the CEO of Oasis, Mr. Adam Ebrahim. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, Shafiq. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So many things to discuss. I have to sort of contract the whole intro, but I think our departure point is your passing impressions of Sona version 2.
Sona version 2, the words fantastic, the messaging good. However, unless we have a united government, the issue of delivery slows down. Mm-hmm. Now we will have a much better, and we have had a much better leadership relative to the previous 9 years, so the last 18 months, and that will continue. But we're not getting radically better because of the division within the ANC. So you're taking 3-4 steps forward and 2 back continuously. Mm-hmm. And as a country, we really need to take 4 steps forward and keep going forward and only forward. Because we have a country that is most probably in a difficult situation, and we've seen it in the economy. And in the economy, you can blame corruption. That's most probably 50% of the issues. But 50% of the issues is poor policy and delivery, mm-hmm. and putting the wrong people into the play. And I see an improvement in corruption, where we will have a much lower level of corruption. Do I see an improvement long term and I see at the national level improvement in delivery, okay? But this is all slowed down by the perceived split in the leadership of the ANC. Mm-hmm. So you can't really get policy decisions difficult decisions that need to be taken to take the country forward quickly because we're in a very difficult situation. And I would like to talk a little bit about the local, the grassroots, because that's really where the problem is. And what we need is 2 things. We need a debate about the policies that have been implemented since 1994. Corruption has been an overlay on those policies, together with very, very poor management and leadership of many of the organizations. That kind of leads to a situation where an economy, we most probably in the worst. I just read this morning that the South African is in its worst economy, is in its worst downtrend since 1945. Now, 1945 wow. Mm-hmm. is World War II. Mm-hmm. Now, I wasn't around, but it wasn't a pleasant time, and we're right there. So unless we have the leadership and, all of this, the backdrop of very, very high levels of unemployment, very, very high levels of inequality, mm-hmm. leading to the perfect kind of playground for the anarchists, which are now coming out. And when you have anarchists together with those 2, and leadership that are more like Clem Attlee, do nothing because of division, we have a problem.
Are we in a situation where the ruling party has to realize that either it acts in the interest of the ruling party, which is not in the interest of the country, or it has to act in the interest of the country? Is this the fundamental issue that we're dealing with in terms of party divisions?
Yes, I mean, if you're president and you're an elected official by the electorate of South Africa, you've got to look after, you've got to put country first. And, you know, in anything that we do, we have to put country first. And if we don't put country first, whether it's party or company or family, actually takes a second, you know, we worse off if the country is not doing well, if the country has got a slow economic growth, if the country has got high crime, if the country has got, you know, the road accident situation, it is ridiculous, and we're not doing anything about it. So there's so many flashpoints. Now we, in a strange way, we're a wealthy country, and we've got all the institutional capacity for wealth, including organizations like ours, overlaying a situation where you have this extreme unemployment, extreme poverty, and inequality and anarchism. Now that is kind of, that's actually a very, very dangerous. Many countries where you have poverty, unemployment, and anarchism, they tend not to be wealthy. You know, so eventually they run out of things that they can destroy. And yet, unless we have a huge amount of wealth, we have a huge amount of infrastructure, we have a huge amount of skills that I was reading, you know, again, for every one person, skilled person coming into the country, 8 are leaving. Mm-hmm. So if we don't sort all of this out, there'll be capital flight, there'll be skills flight, and a natural decay and destruction of the infrastructure of the country.
Now, what we're essentially seeing, and no South African needs to be reminded of it, is that there seems to be a fundamental problem at grassroots. Is this a result of national and provincial leadership being neglectful of their duties, or is it a symptom of something greater than what we don't understand, perhaps?
I think, again, the first lays the foundation for the second. Okay? So if you don't put housing in, if you don't put running water in, if you don't put good schools in, if you don't create security where kids can go to school without gunshots around, if there's no ownership and there's no wealth creation, you actually, and that's really been the issue. Mm-hmm. You know, many places don't have water, so don't have electricity, poor quality. So then with high unemployment, high levels of poverty, and a populist anarchist political force out there, they're basically telling people don't pay. So that reinforces the service delivery, because if you had service delivery at 5 out of 10 rather than 9 out of 10, with non-payment, that 5 out of 10 is going to go to 3 out of 10. And then what's happened with this anarchist debate, this whole issue of land, again, the fight within the ANC, amongst others, you know, and then the anarchist movement is creating land occupations, and ordinary people are losing. So businesses are losing their land, they're losing, and nobody's coming to the defense. So, you know, a cornerstone of a modern economy is the protection of your property, mm-hmm. protection of your wealth. Now imagine somebody comes up to your land and there's no police, there's no politicians, there's no mechanism to get the people off. Your value of your land is gone. Mm-hmm. So unless we make it more attractive for people to pay their bills, i.e. cut off their electricity, cut off their water, that's if they don't pay their bills, unless we make it more difficult for them to occupy land, protect there's this comment that private owners are not protected. You take it at your own risk. No other modern industrialized country where the rule of law exists, do you have confiscations of land? And it's something that what we really need is mass investment in the poor areas. Mm-hmm. We need mass investment in the skills in those areas. We need just mass investment. Now, do you think anybody's going to put money down into those areas when you're not sure whether that land or that building is going to be occupied or burnt? I think whatever's happening is we're actually putting ourselves into a longer, slow economy where the three forces, high unemployment, high poverty, and anarchism, just gains momentum.
Do you think the responsibility here is for national leadership to actually show an example? Because surely if an example comes from the top, those underneath are going to be less likely to push the envelope.
I think that only happens when you have unity. And so unity, and we should pray for unity. This is most probably, despite all the negatives, this is most probably still the most beautiful country. Mm-hmm. It has the most amazing resources, all things that God has given to it. Alhamdulillah, it's just amazing. Mm-hmm. If you look at, you should maybe put a graph on the iron ore price. That, it's shooting through this. Now we have things that is not because of any of us, of any policy decisions, in fact, if you look at what's happening is, if many of the politicians actually slept every day and never went to work, the country would be better off. But now we get into a situation where many business leaders, if they never came to work, like Steinhoff and Tongart, amongst others, the country would be better off. Mm-hmm. Now imagine that that statement. It's an amazing statement that people not coming to work and not going to Parliament may actually lead us with a better economy, better environment. What does it say about the people?
Adam, let's talk about the elephant in the room, a very big elephant. In fact, its ears are sticking out the windows, Eskom.
Eskom has been a symptom of South Africa's issues. Now, I think what's happening is the last 2-3 years, corruption pushed Eskom over the edge. However, that I'd attribute 20% of Eskom's issues, and we'll come on to it. And there were major issues, and it happened over a very quick period of time. Eskom's issues date back 30, 40 years. And it dates back to the dying days of apartheid, where management started looking after their own interests because they knew they may not want to stay in a post-apartheid SOE. And a company like Eskom won. There were big contracts. And so one of the biggest contracts ever was the agreement where Eskom supplied at very, very low cost energy, because at the time they had a surplus, okay, to BHP Billiton for the aluminium smelters. Now, it was at ridiculously low prices. It was structured in a way, and what it did was it was structured in a way that with derivatives, and that's why in Islamic finance and what we do, we don't believe in these things. And so it started creating a big hole in Eskom because the contracts went against them. And then secondly, the very man who signed it, Mick Davis, joined BHP Billiton a couple of months later. You do a very cheap deal and then you become financial director of the company you did the deal with.
Conflict of interest.
Exactly. And nobody focuses on that. Secondly, the issue about very early on, the whole thesis of South Africa's electricity generation was that we would build power stations on the coal fields, and the coal fields would be built in a way that they supplied a certain quality to Eskom, And very often the best quality was export because we could get export revenue. So the Eskom power stations were actually designed for lower quality, but they were very efficient in converting that. They had the advantage of the coal being right next door and very long-term contracts. So, a power station's got 40-year life, so you need coal for 40 years at least. And one of the key policy decisions that was made was to start unwinding that and start supplying coal from further afield and for redistribution reasons. That led to a couple of things. Firstly, one, the cost of coal went up. The quality was very variable. Remember, these are very high temperature generators designed to operate within a very narrow set of operating circumstances. Now you put in different, and so those machines, those generators were never designed for this variant. So efficiency reduced. But instead of having 40-year supplies, you had no supply. Then, thirdly, ANC government postponed, or the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Energy at the time postponed the build of the new build. So we're going to have, they deferred it. And then finally, the policy decisions went all the way back, so pre-apartheid, post-apartheid, right up today. And then finally, even with the apartheid grouping, and they're held now as being the saviors of everybody, there was, from then to now, there has never been an Eskom executive director, non-executive director, operational executive that has wowed me, that has kind of said, wow, what a professional, what a technical person, what a person that, should be running that. Many of it were people that were placed, even today, placed into the organization, and they may not have been the best. So you've got all of those together now with corruption, and we have a problem with a massive amount of debt. Kuseli and Medupi were built, Kuseli was built without power, without coal. So if you don't have coal for your power station, how are you going? And it's a coal power station. How are you going to? How's this thing going to survive? Secondly, power stations normally operate 80-90% of their design capacity because you've got to take down for maintenance, etc. But Kuseli and Medupi will operate between 30 and 40% at best, at high cost. And so I just think that there needs to be drastic remedial action. We have the solution. We need to provide a private participation. We need a regulatory framework, a governance framework, and then private participation. And if we do that through distribution, the network, and generation, we'll solve Eskom's problems. But we cannot, if we assume that Eskom in any other, in its current guise or any other guise, will be the solution to South Africa's problem. No way.
So in essence, one can say, before we go to the international landscape, that Eskom is a microcosm, generally speaking, of the South African problem, in that we have an institutionalized backdrop, which we've forgotten about, and the background of apartheid, in a sense, pushed us over the edge with corruption, to summarize what you're saying.
I'm not sure I'm saying that, because we fought to bring apartheid down, so that the things that they were doing would never be done again. And it's not, the corruption and everything that was there before. And we had a utopian view of the world. Sure. 25 years later, it's proved not to be so. So we actually have, and the problem, we have to stand back and say what we've been doing for the last 25 years maybe is not right. Maybe we need an alternative. Now, the interesting thing is the anarchists are putting an alternative in place, and the alternative is anarchy. And the other side, the rest of us, are not putting an alternative in place because we putting 100% of the blame of all the issues in the country down to corruption. I think 25% is down to corruption, and 75% is down to policy and poor management.
Right, so the message is out there. Let's have a look at the international scenario, sort of focusing out a bit. How is that situation filtering into what's happening in South Africa?
Obviously, a couple of things. When South Africa is a small open economy, so we depend on trade. So typically, we export commodities and by and large import a lot of the manufacturing goods. There was a time when we were manufacturing. However, because of Eskom and because of the policies that diminished our supply side of the economy, we're not able to manufacture as much. And yet, we do have points of manufacturing excellence. You know, the motor industry, we've got points of technological excellence. You know, think about South African producing PayPal. And now, you know, you may not be in South Africa, but we have the people, Tesla, SpaceX. I'm just using the same person through the value chain, but we've got the talent, but we're losing the talent. And what we really need is to rebuild the supply side of our economy so that we're able to supply more of our own, and that will reduce the global impact. So the trade war, I think, will be sorted out. This is all part of preparing major countries for what will happen with the fourth industrial revolution. We see massive unemployment. You just think about it. In the last while, the banks have announced cutting branches. They don't need branches any longer. What's going to happen to all those people that used to work in branches? You've very recently seen companies like MultiChoice. They announced 2,000 people that's going to be retrenched.
Closing down.
Yeah, and that's most probably all because of things like artificial intelligence, robotics, and this is just the beginning. So what countries are doing is they actually, and what America and Europe and Brexit is all about, in my opinion, is preparing for themselves that by 2025, the rest of the world wants to get in there. Okay, and making sure they have their own markets and they keep their populations employed and have hard borders to ensure those people from countries that are less well prepared are not able to get in. And so a country like South Africa, we have fantastic resources, etc., but because of all the issues that we're speaking about, we're less well prepared.
Just final 30 seconds. Is there still water in the glass?
Of course. You know, firstly, I'm a Muslim. I believe that the Almighty doesn't put a burden on you that we're not able to bear. And He's given us intelligence. He will show us the way. And this country is most probably, I'll turn it the other way around. Most probably the glass is 20% empty. Right. And it's 80% full. And despite all what I said, the opportunity curve for brave people, courageous people, people with a vision, determination, and passion for excellence, passion for serving humanity, and passion to make sure that we have a more equal society, that we have a society where no one is left behind, and that's what Muslims are supposed to do. And if we believe in that, then the glass is very full.
Adam, shukran for that.
Thank you, Shafiq, and wish you a wonderful day, and inshallah, see you soon.
Thank you. And that concludes today's edition of the Oasis Focus and Finance Show. A special thanks to our guest, Mr. Adam Ebrahim, the CEO of Oasis. Should you wish to watch this or any of our other shows, you can log into the Oasis Crescent YouTube channel, where you can catch us on LinkedIn. Should you wish to call us, 0860 100 786 or email info@oasiscrescent.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Shafiq Morton. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.